Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Turned Out of Punk Splits. I'm your host, Damien Abraham, and on this show, we bring back two people that have previously been on Turned Out of Punk for another conversation that may or may not know each other. Today on the show, in celebration of the Spiral Heads Till I'm Dead record, which is out this week, we have from Spiral Heads, friend of the show, making his third appearance here, pretty sure it's third, Simon Doom O'Connor, and the producer of the brand new Spiral Heads record, the person I think who has the record for all-time appearances on Turned Out of Punk, Walter Schreifels from Gorilla Biscuits and Quicksand and Rival Schools and all sorts of stuff. This is a really fun conversation. If you want to get in touch with the show, hit up the Turn It a Punk email address, turnitoutapunk@gmail.com. You can find us also on all those social media platforms that you go to at Turn It a Punk. I'm at Left for Damien on Twitter or Instagram. As I mentioned, the Spiral Heads record is called Till I'm Dead, and it will be made available by the fine folks at Academy Fight Songs and Trash Casual Records. You can find out more information at spiralheads.bandcamp.com. And I'm excited for you to hear this thing. It's a fantastic record. There's been a few songs released already, but the album itself drops on Friday the 23rd of this week. If you're listening to this when this thing drops, it's got another episode with Jim Carroll from the band dropping later on this week as well. So it's a Spiral Head celebration here at Turned Out of Punk. But I'm not going to ramble on. Oh, and Walter's going to be playing in Quicksand, Gorilla Biscuits, Rival Schools. Where's the best place for you to put any of those bands into the Google machine and check out dates? I know Walter's going to be going to Vegas for Punk Rock Bowling. I know he's going to be going to play like Double Time, and I think Gorilla Biscuits are playing that too, if I'm not mistaken, and Youth of the Day. And so Walter's doing a lot. Walter's constantly busy. Follow Walter on social media, Schreifels, I believe, at Schreifels on social media. Walter Schreifels. It'll come up. Instagram, Twitter. He's doing a lot. He's out there, including producing this new Spiral Heads record. So I'm not going to ramble anymore. Sit back, relax, and enjoy Simon Doom O'Connor and Walter, Gorilla Biscuits, Rival Schools, Quicksand, Youth of the Day, World's Fastest Car, Moondog, Schreifels on Turned Out of Punk Splits.
Okay, come on.
Got it.
Walter and Simon and Walter, thank you both for coming back to the podcast. Several time members of the Turned Out of Punk Club. Walter, I think you might be the most appeared on guest still. There's no one that I think. Fred Armisen is close, but I think you're still number one.
Good company. That's awesome.
Woo.
Yeah. There's a MVP, Fred Armisen, yourself, David Up, mutual friend of Simon and myself, and label mate of yourself on Revelation, Walter. Yeah. Has been on a few times, but it is amazing to have you both here together.
We'll keep going down the list until you get to me.
Well, you've been on twice. That's more than some people.
Well, this is the turkeys, my third.
Yeah. Now you're in the three club that you get. There's a jacket.
Cool. Who else has been on three times? Anyone cool?
After what the people I mentioned so far aren't cool.
Yeah,
but they've been on more than three times.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm out of here.
Mascus has been on
permaband.
Yeah.
That's the only thing to do. Like you can, at this point, it's a fork in the road. You can like try to be cool and get on again, or just like do something to get permaband. And then
that's true. I could intentionally fuck this up.
Yes,
you could derail this podcast and just really, you go full Travis Bickle on us right now.
I know some words not to say.
Yes. You could violate all the things you don't say on Turned Out of Punk.
Yeah.
You could do your whole routine.
Let me just Google some words not to say.
You can count on me, Damien. I'm going to keep it cool.
Yeah, absolutely, Walter.
You could just go boop whenever you see that look in my eye, Walter.
I was funny because I was talking to my friend Zach the other day, which is where we recorded one of our episodes one time. And that was the coolest hangout. You walked in, grabbed a bottle of wine, popped the wine, and we just chilled in my friend's apartment while he wasn't there.
Oh yeah, that was awesome.
It was awesome. It was a great hang.
The club. That was so cool.
Yeah, there's been some epic hangs we talked about before, but the time you met my mom in Toronto.
That was amazing. One of my deepest regrets is that I didn't have more time to hang with you guys, because that was just such a special thing.
I know. I one of my deepest regrets is not hanging out with my mom more, but I think that's on a more deeper.
Yeah, we should talk about that. Should we call our moms?
Is this what this podcast should be now? Like me really talking about the death of my mother and
turned out a mom.
Yeah, it's just oh boy, this thing's gotten off to a way heavier start than I hoped it would get off to.
Not a mom.
How did you guys first meet each other? Because were you like Simon growing up? Like a Revelation dude at all?
I was Gorilla Biscuits fan. Not really Revelation dude, as we've spoken about before. I was like more into the crusty variety, but love Gorilla Biscuits. But it's not how I met Walter. I think you and I met when I was playing with Lilies.
Yeah.
And we were on tour together for a little bit. And then we hung. I scheduled a coffee because I wanted to talk to you and get advice about how to be a father of a young child and be on tour. And your advice was, I think, be in a seminal classic hardcore band and play a few festivals in Germany a year.
Get Fall Out Boy to cover your song on Tony Hawk.
Yeah, there you go. And then I also asked Kurt Weill the same advice, and his advice was make enough money that your wife doesn't have to work. So I was like, well, neither of those things are really in the cards. But you remember that we went for coffee, and I think this was February 2020. But we knew each other before, and Bob Mould was there.
Yeah, it was awesome.
And I was sick and pretending not to be sick. Remember my tongue kept popping out?
Yes.
And I think I had COVID.
Oh, shit.
Because I just didn't know, but it was February 2020. And I was like, whatever. I'm like, I'm sick, but this isn't an identifiable disease. I'm just going to see Walter anyway. And look, it's Bob Mould. Let me lick his face. There's a photo of us hanging, and my tongue is just poking out this. I just couldn't keep it in my mouth.
Yeah. We were kind of like we were trying to keep it cool. Like, do we bother him? Do we not bother him? And then ultimately we just had to, fuck it. Let's punish him,
Yes.
And he was super cool. He seemed like he could be the kind of person that would just be so pissed off and not be into it. But he was like super nice. I did all the stuff, like told him when I saw Husker Du, and he was patient and just posed for a photo. That was dope. But yeah, good times. Yeah, Simon mainly. I remember meeting him on the Lilies tour, which was like the sickest, like all-star lineup of Lilies, and we just had the best time on that trip.
Yeah,
it's funny with punk because it's like well, this is a cliche now on the podcast, but it's a religion, but it's a polytheistic religion, and there's many gods, and people worship like Ian MacKaye, but it depends on what sect of punk that you're in, on who your deity is and who you kind of like know about and have that relationship to. And it's a weird relationship that you establish with this person because it's completely one directional, where this person does not know that you exist, but you are very involved in this person's life, and you read interviews with this person and kind of obsess over their music and things like this. And I say this as someone who very much was one of my gods was Walter, and growing up, and Walter, is it different when you meet people? Obviously we're all part of punk and we're all down, so none of us is a super weirdo, but like when you meet a weirdo like me that kind of grew up like buying fucking Project X records and all this kind of shit, versus someone like Simon who you're meeting more as a peer, and there's not necessarily this sort of like baggage that person's bringing into this conversation with you for the
Well,
first time.
well, unlike many polytheistic religions, our gods can get canceled, and I feel like a lot of my earlier ones did. But I do think it's like had I met Walter as a teenager, it would have been a much different story. I think I met a lot of people as I was kind of like it was this special, which I love about this podcast, is like a special thing where like I'm not no longer playing as a profession punk with a capital P, but like I'm still kind of, you have that sort of secret people who know. And I felt like even Don DeVore, like who I played Lilies with, like meeting him because we played an Amazing Baby together, and like I had known Ink and Dagger, but by the time I met Don, like I kind of had moved on a bit, and it was just really nice to sort of be like, oh shit, like it was almost like our trajectories were similar, and and we had kind of had this love of punk and hardcore, but also had expanded our horizons musically, and sort of relate on more of a musical trajectory than actually just like punk itself. And I felt like that maybe made things easier for
Yeah, but
me
you were never straight edge, right?
when I was 12.
Yeah, like, but I mean, like, you were never just like, I'm a youth crew kid, or like
No.
I'm like that's the thing. Gorilla Biscuits is canonical to punk, so everyone who's involved in punk knows about that, like on a real level, like knows about that record, has a relationship to that record in some way. But then there's a sect of us that defined ourselves based on who Walter, and I'm talking about you like a third person, but who you are, Walter, and who your friends were when you were teenagers into your early 20s. And that's who, and there's people that take it way further than I have in their life and still adhere to these sort of values that you guys set forth. And then I'm fascinated by when you meet these people that have this sort of like relationship to you that is very intense, but it's completely in one direction.
Yeah.
Versus when you meet someone like Simon that obviously is a fan and has respect for what you've done as a musician, but is much more a peer.
I think it's like I think I've heard the expression parasocial relationship, where you like know, so especially now in like internet age, you can fully like if someone has like a podcast or something, like you can be fucked up and like listen to how you talk and be so into it that you feel you know someone, but in fact you don't know them at all. Is an interesting phenomenon that I think is really happening all the time in our whatever current state of things. But I was thinking about, when I was doing Gorilla Biscuits, I kind of was in the midst of something kind of happening and coalescing, and I was kind of like a part of this larger thing, but I was like thinking like, holy shit, there's Vinny Stigma. Oh my God. You know what I mean? Like, oh my God, Vinny Stigma, talk to me. That's so cool. You're like kind of like normal, weird kid type of stuff. And then when I feel that I meet people that I revere or something like that, sometimes that never breaks down really. Like I'm always going to have that reverence for them. But I think over time, if you just spend a little time with somebody, like you get to see how they were that person too that you were. You know what I mean? They just got contextualized in a certain way. And Ian MacKaye could be, he's got this whole philosophy and he's like really intense, or like John Brannon is like, these sort of iconic punk guys, but at one time they were just guys in the crew. You know what I mean? They were maybe like alpha-ish ones, to like put it in those kind of terms. But when I meet someone like Simon, like I realize, like, I mean, working on this record and seeing how he works and how the guys work together, like I just have like on a musical level, whatever, like he's such an amazing songwriter, such an incredible musician, and super sharp wit. Like I it's just great to be friends with him, and like but the people that I see as my peers, the people that I when I think sometimes like if I'm feeling a little like down in the dumps or something, like what the hell am I doing with my life, and I think of like I'm I worked on the Spiral Heads record. So like I'm gonna do a podcast with Damien. Like these are the people that I associate with and that I can relate to. I'm in a good place. You know what I mean? I think that way about my musical side of stuff and my friendships. It's like a nice place to be. Music is a great way to meet people that you maybe I mean sometimes people that you really admire their work, it's hard to like get past that in a way. Also fine. I think if I meet someone that's like feels that I get a sense feels that way about me, I don't really want to be in that relationship because I can't really be myself too much because I might say something like uncool or something that brings that down. So I really try to immediately be normal with them and try to break that right away.
Well, you want to
do that to me too, that I see that and I appreciate it.
Yeah, so same here. Like I think that it's like you kind of want to search for a personal connection overall, and I think I think back on one thing you said to me, Walter, while we were recording the Spiral Heads record that was just like I identified with so much. I think at one point in one of our after recording drinks, we like I was just talking about like CBGB's New York hardcore scene and like a lot of what I remember about being into punk and hardcore and being a little kid is the almost constant fear and excitement, obviously, that I would feel going to shows and being in this scene and seeing sort of fucked up things happen. And I remember asking you, Walter, like, how did you deal with that? Because also, like, the scene you were in, from all accounts, was, you know, I was in the ABC No Rio scene, which was way more sort of kid friendly, but like the CB's 80s, like agnostic front scene seemed sort of terrifying to me. And I remember asking you about that, and you replied like, I just knew how to disappear. Meaning like you could just become invisible at points. And I related to that. I thought that was an interesting thing to say. And I related to that so much because I would kind of do the same thing. Like if things are getting hairy at a show or something like that, like sometimes you can't leave. Sometimes physically cannot leave, but you can also sort of blend into a corner and just wait for shit to kind of cool off. And I think that's something that definitely attracted me to you even more, is just or that sort of thing, not you saying that, but like the type of person you are, where like you remain a human being throughout everything you've done, and were quick to sort of admit that you had felt scared or vulnerable during these points, and also elated and excited. And I felt like that was a very honest and endearing account of what brought you here. And and I think that like meeting people who expect a certain who expect you to be on, who put you on a bit of a pedestal and expect you to be this idea of who you are in their head, is sometimes difficult to navigate. And I think that like you admitting some sort of humanity or relatable emotions is an easy way to sort of let people in. Sometimes the people you're talking to you wouldn't necessarily get along with, or you don't have things in common. That happens too. But often I think that like showing a part of your actual personality is a rare thing, and kind of an impressive and arguably brave thing in this path that we have all taken.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think the thing that you guys both also have in common is the fact that you are products of New York City, obviously Queens, but I mean like that city, that music scene.
Queens.
and just how different like that experience is for people, especially in the 80s and into the 90s, pre whatever New York is now at this point, which is from the outside seems different when you go to it, but from what people have told me back then, it's a hairy city, and it's a real big city, and there's real big city realities that exist in other places, but feel like they really were always present in punk. And there was always just like weird, fucked up shit in the punk scene that other places didn't necessarily have to deal with in the same sort of way.
Yeah, I mean it's an exciting place. When I was little and lived in Rockaway, you could see the skyline of Manhattan, but it was very far off in the distance. And as a kid, if you wanted to try to get to Manhattan, you'd have to be on the A train for like an hour and a half. And it was super, go through all these super dangerous neighborhoods. And, but in Rockaway, where I lived, the part of Rockaway that I lived in, it's just like a chill beach town, honestly. Like it's almost like it might as well be an island. It's on a peninsula, but you know, it's so kind of it's bordered by like Far Rockaway, which is like, you know, one of these like classic places where they just like leveled it and then put up these giant like apartment buildings and just kind of put poor people in there, and then surprised when like crack hit and it was insane. So that was kind of bordering where I lived, but it was very kind of, it's just nice, and you know, basketball courts and American flags and the beach. It's awesome. It's very chill. So when I look at Simon growing up in Manhattan, and when I kind of moved closer to the city and met kids that grew up in Manhattan, I always thought Manhattan kids were just so much more cool. When you're talking about like that city experience, you know, where I lived wasn't like this urban kind of thing. I mean, there was aspects of it, but you know, like as I said, you could see Manhattan, but it was far away. You know what I mean? And I always thought all my city Manhattan kids, they're just kind of cooler in a way. So I don't know what I would think about that, but
Yeah, I mean, because I'm thinking about that experience, and so like when I was growing up, and I've may have said this on the podcast before, but like where I grew up on 107th Street was 2 blocks away from the complex, the project complex that created pretty much all of the crack cocaine in New York, like what New Jack City's based on. So like when I was growing up, and a lot of the reason I started to dress punk, because I started to dress punk immediately, was a sort of take the even though it's funny, like almost take the target off my back, like because I was such an other that they were just kind of like the kids who would sort of like fuck kids up and rob kids would almost like leave me alone because they didn't really understand me. And at some point, like, and going downtown was almost, and this changed also because Giuliani became mayor pretty much when I started getting into punk, and the whole city changed. And by the time I was kind of in my late teens going to shows, my neighborhood was a lot safer. But at first it was like um it was almost like sort of a respite, or like a kind of I felt like I could, when I went downtown to like Generation Records, especially like in the West Village or even St. Mark's Place, even though it was like kind of, you know, still filled with junkies and shit, it's like I almost weirdly felt safer there at first, which is kind of the opposite of what I was saying. Obviously shows were scary and shit too, and skinheads were always scary, but like there was sort of, I even though I was in Manhattan, I felt like I was not in it. I was in a completely different world uptown than where like the freedom of downtown Manhattan in the East Village. But I also think that maybe that's why I wasn't as attracted to straight edge, because I think one of the first kids who I knew who was into punk and hardcore was into straight edge and was kind of just seemed like an asshole to me. And it wasn't necessarily an escape from, I think I talked to, you know, Jim and Q from Spiral Heads, both grew up straight edge, and the reason they did was because like they wanted to, and I don't know if this is your experience as well, to sort of get away from the expectations and peer pressure of the sort of popular jocks in their high school who thought getting fucked up was just the ultimate goal. And it was a little bit more convoluted for me, where it seemed like it was almost the opposite, where like the popular jocks like didn't, and the cool weirdos did. So I kind of gravitated towards that, I think, you know. But I'm not sure. Like I do think that we both, though growing up in kind of different ends of the city, we both ended up gravitating towards the same place, probably just for the same reason.
Yeah, and I meant more like even necessarily not even necessarily talking about products of the actual environment you're from, more the music scene that churned you out as I guess your careers and people as well. Like you're both products of like the New York punk and hardcore scenes at various times seems pretty violent pretty like there's always shit kind of happening. There's always like realities that are faced by people in that scene that are faced by people in other scenes, but it just feels like more intense, at least how it's presented historically, and certainly how it's come up on the podcast talking to both of you. I think in terms of getting into straight edge, for me at the time, I was like, yeah, like, it gets me away from peer pressure. It's the better way to be. I realize now that it was also like the ultimate suit of armor. Like, who the fuck cares about your party? I don't want to go to your party anyway. Like, it really is like the Matrix real red pill, like the ultimate way to drop out of society in every way, shape, or form. And I obviously I'm not now as I'm smoking weed as we talk. I still think getting into it and having that as a young person was incredibly formative and important to me. And
I think that's a similar thing that I'm saying, like kind of like starting to charge my hair and wear, leather jackets and shit like that, like starting to look super different was my, I don't want to say red pill, but you said red pill, but like was
the real red pill. We call it the real red pill because the other one's not. The other one's just buying more into society. This is like punk is the true. That's when all the kids that were popular at your school became dorks to you. That's when everything became like you really get to see the world for as it is when you get into punk. And I sound like a radical talking about this shit, but it's funny. Feel that.
I think it's like I think I like grew out of that, but then I go like pick my kid up from school and see all the other like normal dads. I'm like fucking dorks, but I'm like, Simon, get it together. They're like lawyers, like they're like
having
so much
kids
better than yours.
Well, exactly. Like they like more hats. They are way more functional in society. And this leads me into something I did want to talk to both of you about too, but I'll get that in a second. But you realize very quickly that interacting with normals when you have kids is one of the worst parts of having kids. Like having to interact with like other parents that have kids on the same baseball team as my kid. Like once in a while you meet one cool parent.
Yeah.
But then you'll be trying to talk to someone even about like the most banal kind of mainstream shit to us, like the Stooges. And they're like, no, never heard of them. And you're like, oh, Iggy Pop, the actor, that dude's band. They're like, oh, he had a band?
Yeah. Oh, man, like the sort of like their fun is so involved in the social scene surrounding their children. Like you go to a fucking birthday party. It's like a 7th birthday party. It's 11 in the morning. And like the dad's like, want an IPA? I'm like, dude, it's like, like I have fun that's not surrounding children's birthday parties, believe it or not. I don't want to talk shit. All the parents,
they're going to watch you and be pissed at you.
They're definitely not listening to this podcast. Do not worry. We are completely safe to talk shit on them.
APAC. All parents are cool.
I luck out. My kids go to an alternative school, so there actually are punk parents. Like there are parents that are way fucking cooler than me.
That's great.
At my kid's school. And so it's awesome. But like any other time that I have to interact. But what I did want to talk to both of you about is the fact that here I am talking to you and you guys are cool people. Like you brought it up about Simon earlier, Walter. Like he's funny. Like Simon, you could work in any social situation, and Walter yourself as well. Like you both like look way more put together than me. I'm a loser. Like if it wasn't for punk, I don't know what the fuck I would be doing. You guys could be doing other shit. Like I am like
that ship has sailed, my friend. But maybe
I am more fascinated by the fact that you guys chose this, and I know you were cool back in the day, Simon, because Dave kind of talked about it when you were on the podcast. You always were dating attractive people or hanging out with attractive people, and you've always had probably a very good group of diverse friends in terms of like what their interests are, and you could function with normal people, I think, far better than me. And I know you can, Walter, because I've seen you in rooms with people that aren't strange like us, and you can be normal with them. And hats off to you guys. Like you are probably way better dads than I am.
I think Dave's getting confused because I looked like a baby until I was about 16, and I think that I was maybe my female attention was more motherly and caretaker than despite what I believed. And then when I finally went through puberty, suddenly that attention left hard. But yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't mean to get into childhood trauma, but I do think like you can like function with cool people and be in cool places. And I think both of you, there's a lot of weirdos like me. I'm not saying I'm like alone in this. There's a lot of weirdos in punk, but you are two of the cooler people I know and more functional people I know.
It's funny, like when you I did feel that rub when I was bringing my daughter into elementary school and you're chilling with the other parents, just being like, I don't think anyone really gets what I do or like what, and I don't really want to talk about it, and just feeling a little bit, okay, this is like, here's people the same age as me, and I'm just into all this. I'm on like podcasts talking about straight edge. These people do not fucking get what that's about at all.
Yeah.
And is it cool that I'm doing that? And then, or should I be doing, the kind of things that these guys are doing, and their concerns maybe seem like, more serious in a way. But then I think, I live freely in so many different ways. You know what I mean? Of course, like, there's stuff that I feel like, oh, God damn it, I don't want to do this, or I have certain obligations, or some things are funner than other things, like in anybody's life. But I think generally by doing this stuff, and by sticking with it and getting very like lucky at certain spots, like I have a very free life. Like I can just go, oh, I'm going to do this now. And I think that's super, that's the exchange when you meet people that aren't necessarily like more or less happy than you, but like have kind of, led normie lives. And then there's people that, like not everyone gets to be a really cool punk rock person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they're not cool,
But with the normie lives, at least like everyone understands, you know what I mean? Like I know what you're saying, Walter. Like I feel like if I say I'm a musician or something, they're like, okay, let's call Child Protective Services. You know what I mean? Like right away. Like I think that there's just this like, unless it's like, well, I wrote the theme song to Succession, but like
Coldplay,
Yeah, exactly. My son's named Apple or daughter. And yeah, or like I won an Oscar for the Barbie soundtrack, or like it's just this sort of kind of hazy, like some people think I'm cool,
yeah.
But you're also like running a successful law firm, which all I can think of is lawyers for some reason. It's the only other profession I know, but like it's a lot more cut and dry. And I feel like even with like friends' parents to this day, like there's definitely a shitload of people of a certain age who are wondering when I'm going to get a real job.
What
and
I think
some of them are accountants.
I think we're conflating two things here, because there's like the professional music thing, which is also impossible, but there's the punk thing. Like there's punk lawyers, there's punk accountants, there's punk people that went to all these different places, and finding one of those people, whatever their job happens to be, is amazing. In terms of the musician question and being like a quote unquote professional musician that no one fucking knows about, that exists on the wart on the back of a microbe in popular culture, which is not yourselves, but I mean myself, I'm saying, it is really weird. And I really do think at a certain point, maybe after episode 500, I'm just going to change this podcast to how do I be normal? And it's just me having people on, just being like, yo, how do you function? Like, and they can be punk people too, because I'm really curious how anyone functions as a normal person in this world.
Like conversion therapy, kind of.
Yeah. Like I want to. I had a show that I had a show when I was in development with. Yeah, I had a TV show called Exit Strategy that I wanted to develop, or a podcast where it's going to be me interviewing people that used to be involved in music and had a job in music, or anything that has a finite amount of time that you can do it professionally, like professional rollerblading, or like whatever it was, where at a certain point you realized, fuck, I got to grow up. And maybe it's at 40, maybe it's 45, maybe it's
sounds like a Saturday Night Live skit with like a short film, like Martin Short could be the professional rollerblader, like 40-year-old.
Yeah,
Well, at some point you have to like realize,
yeah,
oh shit, maybe this isn't forever.
yeah.
And
You just go to a men's shelter and just ask how many of you people used to work in music.
oh
You
man,
know,
Well, I like and from being like in the 90s major label music scene, I think it might, I don't know how much people would want to watch it, but Golden Parachute, like people that were in high places in the music business getting sick salaries and just like bounced and became like real estate agents in Florida, and they're like
yeah.
crushing it, like with like a whole, and still getting like points on a goddamn uh what's the band that goes like high,
Yeah,
Collective Soul.
it's Collective Soul.
like still
Yeah,
collecting points off Collective Soul records, and they're chilling in Florida, real estate agent, sick lifestyle, Golden Parachute peeps, or like, like where is the president of Polydor Records right now? Like that guy had the corner office. He was ripping it. He had produced the Bangles or something like Eternal Flame. And now there's no, he's not the record label president, but I bet he cashed out really, really well.
well,
Yeah.
Mugger in American Hardcore, they talk about how he cashed out on SST, probably at the peak of SST too.
Uh-huh.
And they what did he do with his money? He invested in like Apple or some shit, or in like all
Love that.
this.
Golden
Yeah,
Oof.
made a ton of money. Duff from Guns N' Roses, well, fuck
Well,
Guns N' Roses, from the Farts, from the Fastbacks,
Uh-huh.
made a ton of money because he invested in these other things. These people were really smart. How they handled their business, I really.
I think
That's
Bono was like, Duff and Bono would be fucking rich anyway, for sure, because they're so successful. But I think Bono like invested in Apple at some key juncture and has like endless money. I don't know if that's true, but I've heard that.
I think he has endless money. That's true. I think
he might.
Bono's
even-
doing
He's
pretty
doing all
well.
right.
Like the other guys in U2 are like, damn, Bono's rich.
You know that song,
Yeah.
the sweetest thing. The sweetest thing apparently is written for, I guess his wife, because she
Mm.
found out something and he had to apologize to her. I remember hearing back then.
Mm.
Allegedly, a camera person at Much Music told me a story that Bono, on one of their early tours, had a dalliance with a former on-air personality.
Not Bono.
Yes, and on their
Wow.
very
The
first
same
tour.
Bono?
Yeah, and they're driving down to New York to film them. Now U2's blown up, and she's
Yeah.
like, "We're gonna get an amazing interview with them. Wait,
Oh,
this is gonna
man.
be unbelievable." Gets down there, and apparently, allegedly, she looks over, or Bono's there, looks and sees her, gets this look of like on his face, and then immediately terror and mouths, "My wife," and as his wife sees him mouth, "My wife," and apparently, I don't
In
know.
the Borat voice.
Yeah, that's all according to legend. Borat voice included. I don't know if there's any truth to it, but that's
Yeah.
so I've
You know,
heard.
when you get so nervous, you just revert to the Borat voice.
Yeah, that's where it came from. That's where really he got it from.
Yeah.
So hold on. So just so I get the story right. So Bono had a fling with an MTV personality or a Much Music pop
Much
personality?
Music, my friend. Come on, have some respect for the
Oh,
original.
100%.
Wawa weewa. Yeah. Oh, man, he's like, I wish my apologies made me millions of dollars.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
I would do a lot more bad shit.
That's kind of what these
Luck of the Irish.
that's social media stuff too, right? Like that's what influencers do. They do something bad and then they monetize their apology video for it.
Right.
There is nothing wrong with those influencers. I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
You know what I realized? Like social media and the way sort of the content creation ecosystem functions now is a lot like popular fanzines letter pages used to function. Like I was talking about this actually with Matt from Piss Jeans, where that One Life Crew record came out and you knew it was going to be months of letters in Heart Attack, the opposite of Hot Topic, generated by this, or in MRR. some controversy was going to generate so many letters and was going to become such fuel for bands reacting to things and hating on something. And it really is.
Well, you know who's almost as controversial as One Life Crew? I just think about this.
Who?
Two Live Crew.
Yes, dude.
Yeah, different ways though. Different ways.
Kind of opposite, but
you know.
Yeah. I like that. I think you're honest. I think that's an interesting I think you're right, Damien. I'm thinking about like, but what would, like, now if you write something like, hey, I think this, that they could, you know, if you're an influencer, like you could have like, you know, 800 comments saying like, totally agree, you're a fucking asshole, you know, this whole thing. But like if there was something like in Maximum Rock and Roll, it would be like 5, 3 or 2 sentence things that would be printed, and that would be the whole massive thing. That those 5 points of view would be representative of the entire spectrum of things that people think about a given topic, provided the editorial decisions of Maximum Rock and Roll of what the discourse would be.
But you also don't know what other people think. You don't know how many people disagree with this person.
Yeah,
so you could read something and just be like, well, that's fucking stupid. But I'm the only person who thinks this. So maybe I'm stupid. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And doesn't happen anymore.
Well, it's interesting because like, especially on this podcast, talking to a lot of people, MRR is kind of lauded and even sanctified as being this. And I do this all the time on the podcast as being this important thing that brought punk and hardcore together and democratized media, blah, 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 blah. And certainly my band benefited from it early on. But it's interesting talking to someone like yourself, Walter, where the scenes that you're from really were on the opposite side and really got to see the downside of Maximum Rock and Roll, which was ultimately reflective of one person's point of view. There was Tim Yo at the top, and he did allow other sort of dissenting opinions in there, but certainly with AF and maybe New York hardcore as a whole at a certain point, and then again with Youth Crew and Youth of Today and Ray when Krishna stuff came in. It really did kind of steer a lot of opinions against this stuff and was the other side of democratization.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely like Tim had his view on how things should be, and if he didn't think it, I mean, if he didn't like it, then he would try to suppress it, which is what happens in all the time, you know. And so once you try to suppress something like that, there's going to be the people that that's going to activate their sensibilities to go the opposite, to be more into it and to be more like fuck you about it, you know what I mean? And I think Tim, the cool thing about Tim was that he was such a music guy. Like he had all these records and he was just really, really into it. So even like Youth of Today, I think he was offended in some ways by the sort of the sort of rigidness of its presentation, and that it was presenting these sort of like you know, philosophical you know, there was something like right wing appearing, I think, about Youth of Today that wasn't really to me. I always thought like, hey, you know, it's positivity, it's but I think the way it looked with like shaved heads and all this kind of stuff. But Tim was a fan of Youth Today, so he wouldn't really diss Youth Today. Like we stayed at Maximum Rock and Roll House. Many, like I was there twice, and Tim was totally cool to us. But we would have discussions, you know. So I thought it was cool for that he would on the one hand be supportive of us, like so much that he made us guests in his house, and on the other hand be sort of against the project in some ways. And I think with the religious thing, he was definitely against the project. But I think one of the coolest Maximum Rock and Roll covers of all time is the Shelter one with Ray on the front with the all trippy.
Awesome. Yes.
It's so fucking sick. It looks like something from the 60s. It's like Ray Capel's Coming for Your Children, like watch out. It was so cool and dangerous. I loved it. And I wasn't even into Christian consciousness, but I'd like, this is the best publicity you could get.
Yeah, I actually like just want to I think that like the particular scene I was in, I fell victim to a lot of this sort of I guess kind of early cancel culture, even though it's not really cancellations, but it's saying like, I mean, ABC No Rio, why I loved it, it was so beneficial and integral in my sort of musical progress and everything, and like getting into punk. It was like so rigid and what you could and what you couldn't like, who they would allow to play, what, you know, and then a lot of it was kind of based almost solely on style of dress and things like that. Like, you know, they bands that like, you know, I don't know, a band like, I mean, obviously this is a different scene, but like a band like Integrity, I always just heard as a crust punk band, you know, but they were just not in that scene whatsoever. And I think a lot of it's because of the way they dress and who they played with. And
the OLC had part of it. The OLC riot
yeah,
definitely, I think, cast Integrity in a bit different light. Integrity, one of my favorite bands of all time. I love that band so much, but there's something so the Integrity is like a weird case. I know what you're trying to say, I know what you're saying with this point, but I think Integrity is such a weird case because they had other factors in a lot of the stuff that happened with that.
There's just like a lot of like things like Maximum Rock and Roll or ABC were extremely good at gatekeeping and extremely good at sort of spreading their opinions as fact. And like as a young kid getting into the scene, then I completely fell victim to it. And like why I wasn't, a lot of the bands that I'm into now, I wasn't into then because I felt like they were just like a no-go. Like they weren't part of the scene. They were, you know, a lot of the reason because of what they dressed or who their label was or something like that. And I do think that like that's the punk scene in a lot of ways was a kind of prototype for, you know, I think cancel culture was invented in the backyard of ABC No Rio when they would just sit around and kind of go through demos and talk about why this band shouldn't play, and a lot of the reasons made no sense.
I don't know if
Like,
it's cancel culture. Like, I think to me, it's more just an example of people feeling there are certain things they do and don't want in their space. And I think so much of our
right.
shit in punk was based on dress back then.
Yeah.
And as much as Youth Crew gets labeled a real fashion thing, and there was a fashion thing, I found that level of fashion, especially as a overweight kid, much more accessible than any of the punk stuff. Like the punk stuff was like a leather jacket was like $350. I could buy just like a random pair of Nikes for like
Another
60 bucks at
thing
the clearance store.
that I thought about, that I think a lot of the aversion to sort of Youth Crew stuff was also class based, which is strange. Like I think that like dressing punk and having the ability to sort of like not have a job and kind of live, I mean, no one questioned where you're getting your money from, but like, you know, the crusties didn't have jobs, and like sure, some of them lived in squats, some of them didn't. Like a lot of them I think had a lot of financial support and could afford to dress in a way that wouldn't allow you to have a job. And I think that there was like a weird sort of backwards, non-admitted but definitely present classism in that whole sort of kind of us versus them feeling within that scene.
I always thought like with youth of today and the straight edge thing in New York, especially, really dovetails nicely with the gentrification of the Lower East Side. It's like this kind of people from the suburbs moving into this like kind of urban, you know, wasteland of the Lower East Side with like crisp 100% cotton t-shirts with like four-sided print and like, you know, nice like army surplus uh fatigues and Nike Air Revolutions. Like you're coming into like sort of wear very like it's almost like you know, in some ways like how a skinhead thing is like a working class uniform. There's certain commonalities with that, but it's also very connected to like suburbs, you know, like you could go to high school dress as a straight edge kid, be punk, and be into all the shit that you're into, and even wear like you could shave your head, even you could maybe make it blonde, and you wouldn't get your ass kicked every day by the jocks. Like you're just right under the line of being weird. But when you go to New York, you are weird because you're in this sort of you're wearing a varsity jacket. There's no fucking varsity high school stuff in New York City public schools. Kids don't go to the football games, and there's no cheerleaders, or none of the schools I went to anyway.
Well, 100%. Like at Thulsa Doom, my old my crust punk band from the 90s, like, Leora, the singer, was punk as fuck, worked at Generation Records. I was punk, not as fuck, but as shit. And but like, Mike Tracy, the drummer, grew up in Riverdale. He was into crust punk. He'd wear a Crudo shirt, but he looked kind of, I guess youth, or I would say he looked normal. And now he's a fireman. And I felt like and I remember like Leora being like, you need to dress more punk. And he just couldn't do it. He just wouldn't do it. He was always wanted to look normal, except, honestly, the only tell was like the shirts. I think for the kids you're talking about, like, sure, maybe bleached hair, but like, you're wearing a Youth Today shirt or a Judge shirt or whatever like that, like that's a tell, but everything else kind of you blend in with your surroundings more so.
And when you're talking about it in that way too, it made me think, although I did try the punk look, I just didn't really I couldn't commit, or I just didn't look good in it. That becomes a very identifiable thing that is like being portrayed in media. So like anywhere you go, oh, that guy has charged hair. He's wearing, the leather jacket, the combat. Oh, I get it. He's a punk. I saw that on Quincy or something. Like, I understand what a punk is. Whereas like, and even when you go to CB's, the people that dress like that, obviously, okay, we're all punks, we're here doing a punk thing. Whereas like the straight edge kid had a certain subversiveness to it by not being so identifiable. And it was more about like, what you might think they're into, whereas if I look like a punk, oh, well, they're into spitting, they're probably taking drugs, they might be doing petty crimes. Like the straight edge kid is like, okay, so you listen to this music that sounds crazy, but in fact, you're like feeding the homeless on the weekend, or there's almost like a Boy Scout weirdness about it. But I don't know, somehow like I liked that as a subversive thing within this like crazy scene, and also making music that was reflective of authentic to whatever, being a teenager and all that experience, but also like could hold up against, we had the best mosh parts, I thought, at that time, like
100%
really good.
It also was like, we brought up, going back to what you said about skinhead stuff and being the uniform of the working class. Like in England, you can buy a Fred Perry shirt for next to nothing. Like it's pretty cheap, and you could buy Doc Martens pretty cheap, and you could buy nice jeans. Like all that stuff was
the suspenders are expensive.
Well, that's where they get you.
Yeah,
but all that shit here was
your pants
import.
Around your ankles.
Well, all that shit here was import. Like to me, Youth Crew, like all the stuff you mentioned, you could buy that at the discount stores. You could buy it at the clearance rack. Like obviously to get the right Nikes, and when it eventually became like, by the time I was involved in it, like I'm going to be the period correct Youth Crew kid from 1989 living in the year 2004. But like prior to that, it was just about, to me, dressing in whatever you got and whatever you could find, which I think was in keeping with what Minor Threat did and
100%.
Shifted to, right? Because it's, and that to me was like what was appealing about it. And there's something that is terrifying to people about straight edge and Youth Crew, and obviously aesthetically, my dad freaked out because of shaved heads, and he was like always like, the X reminds me of another bold symbol that a certain group of people that told other people what to do would wear, and like very adversarial to that thing. But like when you tell someone like, oh, I'm not into any of the stuff that motivates you, like especially with the premarital sex or like the promiscuous sex type, whatever that component would be added to it, and then people are like, well, surely it's a religion then. You're like, no, I'm doing it because I choose to. It freaks people out. People are just like, it becomes like, oh, you're fascist, or you're telling us how to live our lives. And it was amazing to me how much of a reaction that got, and especially from my parents who did drugs, who partied, who saw punk bands, and were like, they were they were wild. It,
Wait. So no sex means you're straight edge? That
That part of it was never real. I don't
well,
know.
then I'm nailed to the X, dude.
that's the thing that was the thing amazing that was amazing about it is it allowed you to kind of champion the fact that no one wanted to have sex with you.
Yeah,
That's
that's true. Like that's actually a very cool part of it.
it's a
Yeah,
Like,
choice. It's a choice.
Ian,
yeah, hey, I don't. I like this.
Ian,
Yeah.
I would love to and Ian, I've had, we've talked about this before, Walter, obviously, but I've had moments with Ian where I've had the chance to kind of talk to him about this stuff, but I'd love to have him on the show, but I just don't think he'll ever do it.
It
Probably
sounds like
because,
he's not straight edge, it's Bono. So
well,
Nope.
the,
yeah.
when he gave straight edge to the world, he gave us people like ourselves, myself, Walter, yourself too, for some reason, even though I'm sure you didn't have to. He gave us such a gift because it was like, oh, I don't want to party and I don't want any of this shit. And by including the no sex part, it gave like a badge of honor to something that would have been imposed on otherwise.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Like when Pee Wee Herman falls off the bike and says, "I meant to do that."
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It was something that you could choose to adhere to or not. Like the no sugar thing in veganism, it feels.
Oh man, I mean it's an interesting thing. I think it is threatening when, in the same way, like when people are vegan, where by being vegan, by just saying I'm being vegan next to somebody that wants to eat a hamburger or whatever, the person that eats the hamburger could feel like this person is judging me without saying anything, just by the choices that they make. And I think being straight edge at a time like in high school, when you are pretty, like, not everywhere, and not, but I think generally, like, my generation anyway, like in Rockaway, you just want to get drunk and be wild, smoke cigarettes and be crazy. And if you watch like Suburbia or Repo Man or any of those kind of things, like that's the ideal. So you're being kind of like in a sort of you could look at it conspiratorial as like you think you're being punk, but in fact you're just doing the stupid shit that society wants you to do by getting fucked up, playing this role. You're actually like taking yourself out of contention for like doing something positive in the world and being effective as a young person. And I think conversely, like the kind of straight edge thing, the appeal of that is to be like, no, in fact, I'm choosing not to do that, and I'm going for something higher than you're going for, and I'm not going to have sex, even though I wouldn't be having sex anyway, but it takes the pressure off the awkwardness at this time in
Right.
your life when you're 16, and you can just totally mismanage any one of these categories. You can mismanage your drug use, you can mismanage how you are sexually, all these kind of things, and you're kind of like having this sort of philosophical backing to kind of enhance your, and you also have a group to back you up and all this kind of stuff. It's very appealing, but I think it's threatening to people that feel not that way, and it's just like kind of how little societies work.
Right. I mean, it's so.
Hey everyone, for the past few months, Factor has been sponsoring Turned Out a Punk, which has been amazing because in addition to helping me bring this podcast to you each and every time, it has also meant that I have had delicious, ready-to-eat meals waiting in our refrigerator. So for myself, when I'm hungry, I don't have to worry about what I'm going to cook myself. There's a ready-to-eat vegan meal for me. And for when my kids are hungry and they are eating anything but vegan, there's a meal ready for them too, because each week there are 35 ready-to-eat meals ranging in all sorts of diets, from vegan to non-vegan to keto to veggie to calorie smart, ready, prepared, and delivered right to your door. And these chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals are ready in just 2 minutes. And you're saving money compared to takeout, and you can adjust how many meals you want, from 6 to 18 delivered to your door every week. Plus, there are an additional 55 add-ons, from smoothies to snacks, so you can have breakfast, midday bites and all sorts of other things. So why not give these heat and ready to eat, no fuss, dietitian approved, chef crafted Factor meals a try? Head on over to factormeals.com/TOAP50 and use the code TOAP50 to get 50% off. That code is TOAP50 at factormeals.com/TOAP50 to get 50% off. And thank you to Factor for supporting this show and feeding me and the kids.
That I completely understand. I mean, there's an element of that of sort of that ideology that is sort of mimics religion in a way, where like you feel these certain ways and then you find a kind of a scripture to abide by that says what you're doing is the right way and what you're doing is good. But ultimately, I do think it sort of allows you a freedom from, like you said, peer pressure, and the peer pressure in fucking high school as a teenager is so horribly oppressive, and it controls almost everything you do. And to find a loophole and a way out of it is liberating. And like, but I do have a question for both of you guys who were straight edge at one point, decided not to be fully or whatever. Like, at that point, was it just kind of like you realized that you are no longer kind of would in a position to fall victim to the peer pressure of society as a whole, and you're now free to make your own choices? Or at some point, like, where like the people who are getting fucked up or whoever aren't necessarily like the bullies and the jocks in high school, you're meeting people who you actually want to hang out with, who seem to like kind of do what they want. And it's more of a question for you guys.
Yeah, I think I had fun in Rockaway. Like, one of the first things you do when you're like 13, basic 12, maybe for some kids, is get drunk on the beach. You just drink as much as you possibly can, and just that's the thing. And so I had a few years of being drunk and having that fun, whatever traumatic could be. For me, it was mostly fun experience until I found the straight edge thing. And then that just opened up so much of a interesting world to me. And, I was in a band traveling around and meeting all these like-minded people. And, I felt like I had some sort of purpose in a lot of ways for that was really positive for me. And then I think when I got into my, I guess I just didn't want to be really part of a group like that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like maybe it had become, as a sort of as a I don't want to say it, because it's still continuing, but at the time that I was into it, it was certainly like very much a trend. Like it became a thing. And then everyone was wearing the same clothes. Everyone was wearing the same shoes, whatever. And I just started to feel that this was really constraining. And, not like I got liberated from like weed or anything like that, or like, now I can drink and be myself, there was no like philosophical thing, but I just like didn't really feel that connected anymore to, I wanted to kind of have my own path maybe more than be part of the crew. And my music got like that too, like where I was like more talking about my own experience and not about like, we've got to do this, it was more like, I don't know what the fuck to do,
Right.
That was where I was at.
Well, it's funny. I made this sort of allusion or kind of connection earlier in the conversation between sort of like dressing as punk as I did and straight edge, where I do feel like one of the, back to sort of like the fashion of straight edge you guys were talking about, or fashion being a hardcore kid, because it was subtle, because you did look relatively normal. There's these little signs and signifiers. I think it would allow people to sort of actually meet people who they liked within the scene, more so when you're like kind of just a drone to the punk fashion the way I was at first. I found myself sort of gravitating towards people who wore the same patches as I did, who had the same sort of like specific, anarcho-punk, conflict, Colin Jerwood style as I did. And many of those people with the exception of Dave, obviously David Up, but like I didn't actually like. We just had the same shirts, but I thought because we had the same shirts, because we dressed the same, because we looked good walking down the street, and we could be on a postcard, like those were my friends, and I felt like my sort of rejection of being sort of classified within the punk scene was kind of stopping dressing punk, which I like by the time I was 17, like I stopped kind of like within Thulsa Doom. Like if you look at the backs of the 7 inches, you can even see that like I was wearing like I looked more like a hardcore guy. I was wearing like a Yankees hat, and by the end of it, and like not, I just didn't want to sort of close my social group off so much to people who looked exactly like pristine punk. And not only that, like you're talking about like like if you want to look punk with capital P punk, like you can't really go half-ass. Like I tried. Like I remember like I'm like, oh, I don't want to get bondage pants. I'll just get these like plaid pajama pants and tuck them into my like, $15 boots I got at the Army Navy store. But like there's such a fine line between like fashion punk and pirate that like I just looked like a pirate, and people let me know I looked like a pirate. People let me know that, like if you want to dress punk, like you have to get these British bondage pants, and you have to get the Doc Martens, and you have to put your laces in a certain way, and you have to have 2 belts. And like, I thought there was not a lot of wiggle room for like a slow kind of ascension into the punk scene in that particular subsect of the punk.
Yeah, the biggest lie that punk ever told is that there's no rules. There's a lot of fucking rules in every part of this bullshit. Yeah. Like, and they're all self-imposed, and none of it really matters. But yet we all kind of weirdly adhere to them because of social pressure and carry it with us. But it's wild the impact the Youth Crew thing did have and how quickly it spread across not only America but like the world, where this thing became like a wave.
I mean, being on it, like we were like with Youth of Today. I mean, like, Imakai did put the concept out there. And also I think I just read the forward that Guy wrote for Glenn Friedman's book, A Minor Threat Pictures. It was really, really a great forward. And talking about how the Minor Threat lyrics, how Ian's lyrics are very, very to the point, giving you instructions about what to do. It's super direct. Mm-hmm. And Youth Today's music was like that too, even to like a more, I don't know, that was really told people kind of like, here's a way that you can dress, think, and have fun, and we were going out, if my understanding of it was to convert everybody in the scene to our little program that we had going, you know what I mean? For their own good. It was very proselytizing. And going across the United States for the first time with Break Down the Walls tour, like you would see like pockets of like 15 kids at the show, and that were kind of had the Youth Crew look, but they didn't have like the details down, like what you said, like they would have like, the general look. And those guys would be the nexus of the next time we would come back, and the place would be just like, quadrupled the number.
Wow.
Like every kid and in Europe, it was fucking bananas. We went over there, we were playing all squats, like all punks, like, squatter people, like drugs, all this kind of shit. We came back with Gorilla Biscuits within 6 months. The whole place was so goddamn different. It was like everybody had kind of bought into American skateboarding, and it was like
there was just garbage bags full of dreadlocks outside.
Yeah, totally. Just like
well, that first tour is with Jail Cell Recipes, right? At least the UK dates.
The UK dates were Jail Cell Recipes. We were in ID Mac. Youth Today in the UK was nuts. I mean, that was sadly that was like the end really of Youth Today, because Ray was into Christian consciousness already at that point. And had we gone back there again, Jesus Christ, it would have been sick. But we were in ID magazine when we were in London as this new craze, like this straight edge thing.
Wow.
And we played London, whatever, Ulu, I don't know what the hell it was. But anyway, we played to like 1,000 people in this like university. Like it was insane. And Polystyrene came to the show. I slept at Polystyrene's house, not with her, but at her house that night. It was just such a wild end to that tour to feel like, oh my God, like we're being recognized like a band would be recognized.
That's crazy.
Not just in this like little thing. And I think it was because the whole thing was very easy to get. You know what I mean? You have this charismatic kind of like, front person with these big speeches to contextualize the songs, kind of work you into a frenzy, and then hit you. And the music was like 100% good. But people got into it. They understood like, I could get these clothes. I can be into this philosophy for whatever, maybe 6 months. Who cares? You know what I mean? But it was like, how many bands are, especially in England, I think they get into crazes, sort of.
Yeah.
Oh, we all love ska. Oh, we all love acid house or
But
whatever.
now we hate ska.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but it's like, I think it's. Did you guys, the second time you went there, did you, instead of saying thank you after the song, did you just say you're welcome?
Could have.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's amazing though.
Well, I think
it was part of a. I saw it as like us trying to as part of like Ray's program, really make people's lives better, make the scene better, like less violent, less racist. Because in New York there was like straight up like it was super violent, and there was like racist there, dude, like 100%. Like, hi, I'm your local Nazi skinhead. Like, I have a role here. You know what I mean? Like, we were trying to make that unacceptable. And I think all those things were really good things. And but after a while, it just, what ended up happening was that the people who believed that made their own scene, and then it was just a whole bunch of people that felt the same way about things, and then that's not that fun either.
Right. I have a question though. Was it? I forget. I think you posted, or maybe I sent it to you. Was it Gorilla Biscuits or was it Ether Today that like toured Europe with Nausea?
Gorilla Biscuits played shows with Nausea.
How did that? I was always wondering about that, because honestly, like, even though it was only a few years later, but when I started getting to the scene, like the kind of bands like Nausea and bands like Gorilla Biscuits just wouldn't play shows. Like the crust punk scene and the hardcore scene were so separate that like it seemed like there was absolutely like very, very little overlap. But
well,
like,
I would say like that that's very cool, because the thing that was so great about the scene that we were in, and maybe I misrepresented it in some ways, but like if you look at the Revelation compilation sampler or whatever thing, it's Together is what it's called. The bands are all diverse. Nausea is on the comp, as well as like YDL.
Well, that's the thing. Forget the Nausea thing. How, and you today, how did Nausea and YDL coexist? Like, that's only in New York shit where all these disparate views seem to be able to like coexist.
That's why it was so good. You know what I mean? Because I don't think YDL's like sort of right wing ness was like understood in a way that we would understand it now. I think it was just like obviously, like, I wasn't into it. I saw it as like not a good thing, but I could still see those guys and be, what's up? You know what I mean? Or because I've seen people, and the Nausea people were the same way. Like the Nausea people knew the YDL people. Like, like everyone was sort of, maybe that's a naivete, like where it's like now you'd be like, you would never mix with people that have a different patch than you, whatever. But in that New York, it was all supported, and I would give Ray that credit for 100% bringing everybody together, and it's cool.
Like, I remember, like, this is maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, where one of the dudes, this is a little gossipy, I apologize, one of the dudes from YDL was I guess he worked for Eater or something like that, and he was like I guess fired from his job because some photos or like some of the politics of YDL. Yeah, and I'm on Facebook. I've lost access to Facebook now, don't ask. But at the time I was Facebook friends with Neil Tribal War Records, who was also in Nausea. And I remember he commented on the post saying like, I don't remember the guy's name, but we're good friends, and it was a different scene back then. Things were different, and we
They
could
were
be
roommates.
friends, something like that. Yeah,
Neil, I think Neil and Nick were roommates,
yeah.
actually.
Which shows it kind of shows how that people were maybe trying on different hats, so to speak, but it was this understanding that like everyone's here for the same reason, and like it might, we might dress differently or like, but I do kind of, and Walter, you were there, but like I do sort of like long for this mythical time when there wasn't such kind of compartmentalization of each specific subgenre of punk rock, and almost like any sort of a kind of uh, unity within the tribes was sort of frowned upon.
Yeah, it was a special equilibrium that didn't exist. I mean, existed probably for like a couple of years, and then it kind of fragmented out, and I think became like ABC No Rio, became a sort of like almost like a life raft from the kind of like sort of violence that I think that scene kind of devolved into. But for a while there was like a cool, and like the views I would think of YDL, I don't know, but they're like 14-year-old kids, dude. They probably like saw Last Resort, or we're into some skinhead bands from England, and we're just basically appropriating that, not really understanding like what this means, too much. And that's not to like say that, oh, it's just some harmless racism, you know what I mean? Or fascism or whatever, however you want to characterize it. But it's like kids trying on these things, you know what I mean? Neil's case, he's trying on this sort of, I think he was a bit older, but like they were teenagers, you know what I mean? Like if Neil is like doing some sort of job that is part of capitalism right now, like does that mean he was like inauthentic at that time or whatever, or if he was just a kid,
Well, he was born in 1926, I think.
He kind of looked like he was.
Yeah.
But hey, you know what sucks is I got a friend downstairs that I gotta let in. I can either run downstairs and get him and let him in, or if you guys want to, I gotta do that.
And I don't mean this is a long topic potentially. So, but outside of Nirvana, I maintain that Gorilla Biscuits and Operation Ivy, and maybe even more than Nirvana in a way, are two of the most influential bands to ever come out of underground music. Because Nirvana, Bleach wasn't influential. Nevermind is the influential record. But Start Today with Gorilla Biscuits and Operation Ivy Energy are records that, like, Zach De La Rocha was influenced by GB, like Steve Aoki, like Fall Out Boy, like Steve-O. Like the influence of Start Today and the effect that record had on this music, not just this music, all types of genres of music, it's just profound. And that record to me was as important as Youth of the Day is, and I know I wasn't there, so I'm only looking at after the fact. I think Start Today is the record that really kind of, that movement gifted punk and changed the face of it forever.
Well, Damien, I want to say I love you for finally speaking the truth about this whole GB Nirvana thing.
Yeah.
People are scared to bring this up, but yes, you're quite correct. Well, I think like GB was and I think just like the hardcore scene of the late 80s or whatever, and even what it is now, I can't comment as much about it, but like we came out in a scene where all the people that were into that stuff, my age, whatever, I think we're really well suited for like the times we live in now, and are doing interesting, cool shit, and moving culture and all that kind of stuff. So like being into, in the same way, like I'm, you know, Minor Threat, you know, like is like a starting point for like a lot of, you know, I'm coming off of that, you know, or Negative Approach, or these kind of things, you know, to be in that lineage. And the people like Zach, you know, Zach is a you know, a contemporary, a peer at that time, you know. So you know, we're all part of that, and Steve as well. You know, and so you look at what Steve's doing with his music, or what Zach did with Rage Against the Machine, and you know, just look how people dress, like streetwear, and you know, we're talking about like youth of today and all that kind of stuff. Like, I think that we were in a flow of people that would go on to really influence culture, and also, you know, connecting to, especially in New York, connecting to hip hop culture, and how that kind of like, you know, I don't think of GB or whatever stuff. It's not hip hop, but if you listen to all the music out of New York, and you know, when you're talking about like sneaker culture, fashion, all that kind of stuff. Like, I think these were just like being part of a point in culture in the United States, in New York City, that germinated in and kind of flowered, and we were in there, and you know, I think obviously I'm a fan of the record and all that. And you know, Nirvana has their thing, sure. You know what I mean?
Well,
But it was
I think
philosophically too, right? Like that, it opened like there's this person, I'm sure they don't want credit for this thing, but they used to say like, start today is the age of quarrel for girls, and like
Yeah,
kind of like a way of diminishing the record, kind of. But I think that is an awesome thing in the sense
yeah.
that it opened it up way
Uh-huh.
bigger hardcore, and it made it okay to be sensitive in a way. Like, and obviously Fugazi and all these bands and emo and all that kind of thing. But I also think like Start Today had a huge impact on making it okay to have all the feelings. And I think there's a misreading of that record as a straight edge record. I think it's more a record about positivity and
Yeah.
just
well, I think as a founding member of Operation Ivy, myself, I could chime in here. Um, it was Dust. My name was Dust at the time. But no, I agree wholeheartedly with that sort of comparison. I think that like one thing about Nirvana is like Nirvana being my gateway into punk is that like Nirvana's sort of point was almost alienating the audience,
Yeah.
and not sort of, it wasn't like a positive force of unification and like you can do this too. Is more like you can't do this too because you're not this fucked up genius that
Yeah.
can't be replicated. And I think that like while it was inspiring, and obviously many people have tried to do Nirvana, I don't think that like anyone's ever successfully been able to kind of replicate what they did. And I think a lot of it's because of the brain and the human being that Kurt Cobain was, where I feel like Gorilla Biscuits and Operation Ivy were part of a scene, and a scene that they loved, and a scene they wanted to promote, and they almost wanted to, you know, I'm sorry I'm talking for you, Walter, but like from my interpretation as a fan, like encourage people to go out and replicate or interpret and start their own thing because of the positivity, as opposed to sort of like the angst and negativity of a group like
yeah,
Nirvana.
but Nirvana, like by the time that all happened, Nirvana was a mainstream band. They were part of the machine. The machinations were there, so they were getting radio play. Like Nirvana, the mainstream needed Nirvana. The
Yeah.
underground needed Gorilla Biscuits and Operation Ivy because that those were on independent labels. Those things kind of spread organically, and those things created whole new subgenres, whole new realms of possibility within this thing. And there were records like Minor Threat obviously before that, and there's like a continuum. But I think all those records coming out around the same time, I'm just I'm never shocked by the impact that Start Today had. Like really thinking about it. Anyway, Walter, you got to go, and we're just blowing smoke up your ass now. But
Well, I guess I just wanted to say one thing, which, and I appreciate that that's so nice. But I was just thinking about with you know, and getting it from the Youth Today thing, like with because I wasn't even thinking about like the lyrics and the messages of GB, but like I had a moment when we played this in the fall, in New York, and just looking at the group of people that came to see GB. Like we did 2 sold out nights in Brooklyn at this, really cool place. And
I was there, buddy. Remember?
oh yeah, you were there. We played together. And you remember the crowd there was like young
Yes.
people, old people,
Yes.
like all different races, like people of all different, transgender. Everyone is like represented, and there was no whiff of violence or any of that kind of stuff. When I was writing you're talking about like the sort of like different visions of what the scene should be, in the Revelation kind of compilation, like Nausea would have seen it this one way. YDL was kind of going for this other kind of direction. There was Breakdown seeing it from another view, like playing that show. It's like, oh my God, this is the exact scene that I wanted how I wanted the scene to be. And like, here it is. Like, I mean, it's just a GB show, but like, the kind of idea of like, there's a certain earnestness about it, but like it's definitely a stark contrast to the sort of I think, although I'm a huge Nirvana fan, I love them. I think, in many ways I wouldn't have the career I have if it wasn't for Nirvana breaking through in the way that they did. Yeah, it's a kind of nihilistic vision, like even if success comes, you sort of resent it in a way. And GB is and I think early Operation Ivy too has that sort of like youthful embrace of life, but also not being like being able to see things as they are too, because there is a lot of like struggles and nefarious kind of things that you're going to encounter in life, and like they're real, but like coming at it from a good place.
Yeah, I mean, I do, and like obviously we all know I love Nirvana, but I do think that there was a certain attitude that they had that was kind of intentional alienation. Excuse me if I've said this already, of the crowd, where you almost like they made you feel stupid for liking them, which is almost like the opposite of inspiration. Still, I've many people, including myself, found inspiration from it, but it was just this like, oh yeah, you like our fucking songs, you fucking idiot, this, which is like a very, I mean, hey, that's cool. I mean, when we were talking about like off air fucking up shows intentionally, I feel like that band weirdly kind of towed the line between like like fucking everything up intentionally, but still being this incredibly tight, important, prolific band. But like, I do think it was like, it just wasn't welcoming, and it didn't make you feel comfortable in your own skin enough to sort of like smile and fucking start your own shit and have the confidence to do so.
Yeah, there was something in the energy of it, but it kind of like was a vibe that like went in the culture for like a couple of few years, you know what I mean? But I think like being in that kind of realm too, like that early 90s like post Nirvana wave, that there was just this sort of blasé attitude towards everything that you're just like, oh, it's bullshit, you know what I mean, like kind of thing. It's one part of that whole thing that I guess identifies it, but it was never really a great fit for me. I think I'm just more like, come on, let's do it, we got this, you know what I mean? Until I'm not, I guess.
And I don't think they were as people. Like, I think they're all from hardcore scenes that were like active and you do shit. I think that's definitely the culture that was kind of put on to them, and the drugs. And I think the way people interpreted the drug stuff.
And the success. I think the fact that they had such like wild success kind of really early in their career spawned a lot of the sort of fuck you fans attitude, because they weren't in a scene, they were barely in a scene, and then they immediately the world became their scene, and they didn't know who their fans were. So
that couldn't have been easy to in a lot of ways, to be like so famous and so like, I mean, basically like in my lifetime, like I don't know of anything musically that like turned the page as much as they did. Like, I mean, I guess the Beatles would have done that, not you know, but like who else really just flipped the script like that? Like,
Well, John Lennon's fucking. He's like, you listen to any interview with him, he's just like, oh, they're just words, doesn't matter. Oh, just imagine it's just a word. Doesn't none of the lyrics matter. You're just like kind of yucking everyone's yum almost intentionally, right. Like, which I think Kurt Cobain took a page from, or maybe didn't take a page from, but had the same emotional reaction to sort of the success, where like he started thinking of his own art as kind of bullshit, and that didn't end well.
That's a cope. That's, like with a thing that you'd be like, oh my God, it must be so much fun. Everyone loves you and is inspired by what you're doing and thinks you're a genius. To a point, like maybe there's was a few months where he thought it was really fun, and then it became really just stressful. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, MGMT, honestly, like they had a bit of that too. They really successful first record. And then I think like the second record was kind of like, now that people are listening, let's make them listen to like what all this fucking weird ass. It's a great record, but I do think there was a little bit of that sort of attitude of like, we didn't want the success we got with our first record. Like the hits were kind of the joke songs, and there's a lot more serious material on there that you're not paying attention to. But like, well, fuck it, if you're paying attention to us now, like suck on this,
and there's like a lot of insecurity that I think gets masked by people in bands, and I think that was happening with Nirvana. But I think also people underestimate the punk rock guilt.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
Oh my God.
All your friends hated your band, or didn't hate your band, but like just like weren't interested in what was happening, and then you didn't have that support system around. Yeah. Like, I'm obviously judging from afar with this, but it does feel like it would have been really heavy to deal with, to be ostracized from your peer group. It's not just music, it's your life in this shit.
I have immense punk rock guilt. Honestly, if it wasn't for this podcast, like I'd just be fucking, I don't know where I'd be. Like yeah, just Jesus Christ. Like I'm on a podcast with punk in the name, thank God. So there we go.
We all carry it. Anyway, Walter, you got to go.
Yeah, I do, but I feel purged.
You want to keep going, or you want to?
We got some time. We got some time, buddy.
We'll keep going.
Yeah, man. We don't have to tap out. I find sometimes when someone chops off the podcast, that's when the real fun begins.
Oh yeah.
Then we can shit talk them.
Jesus, can you believe the fucking bullshit that guy was spouting? I mean, like some of the stuff that stuff you're saying about Gorilla Biscuits and like Walter in general is part of the reason that Spiral Heads chose him to sort of produce the record, where like he is so encouraging and kind of open that like we wouldn't feel nervous about bringing ideas to him or having him chime in on our ideas, which is like, could you imagine having fucking Kurt Cobain fucking produce your record? Like, that'd be terrifying.
There's that story, right? Like at the Punk Museum, they actually have their Kurt Cobain couch, they call it, which is the couch in the studio where he was recording the Melvins record, and he would just nod off the whole time, and then
right, and he would like disappear or something. Well, yeah, what's this? Which was that, Stoner Witch?
Yeah, he'd like disappear and then come back and just pass out on this couch, and it's weird to see it.
That sounds like what Rick Rubin does, though.
Have you ever met Rick Rubin?
I haven't.
My friend's super tight with him. This wrestler I know, Darby Allin.
Yeah, in fact, when MGMT first got or the first record came out, they had a meeting with Rick Rubin that never amounted to anything. And Isaac Brock just told me a story about Rick Rubin reaching out to him, but he canceled on Rick Rubin and never got that phone call again. You can't cancel on Rick Rubin, I think.
Rick never reached out to us, but he did reach out to Jay Retard, and
really
Jay telling us all sorts of stories about meeting with Rick Rubin. And
I wonder what he wanted to do, like an acoustic record. I feel like he always wants to do something like that.
He did, because I think around the same time he did that International Noise Conspiracy record that I don't think ever came out, or maybe it came out eventually. And then he also did a record for The Gossip around then too.
Really?
Yeah, like he was doing some kind of, I don't know, garage punk outreach at that point.
When was it, like 2009 or so?
Yeah, it was when we were all kind of getting signed. around that kind of period.
Right,
Like,
right.
the weird moment, the last vestige of critical culture having impacted music.
Yeah, that's like, yeah, when punk rock people thought figured out that like hipsters could like punk.
Yes, it was the hipster core. And there's like, it's interesting because like talking to Matt from Piss Jeans, like I consider them part of the wave.
Yeah,
No Age, Jay, Deer Hunter. There's like a bunch of Mika Miko. There was like a bunch of bands around the same time that were all in conversations with the same people. Vice was a big factor in it because Vice
totally.
hadn't moved into the news organization period.
Yeah. It was, I also feel like that was right after the sort of like early man and the sword,
Mm-hmm.
and like when like kind of like sort of stoner Sabbath metal was now people figured out how to push it on the hipster population. And then
Yeah, which is interesting because I think that was the mainstream kind of success story out of that period is Queens of the Stone Age.
Mhm.
But that goes back to like early Vice championing Man's Ruin super hard. And Shane, one of the co-owners of Vice, was in a band called At Ultra Boost Catastrophe that had a record on Man's Ruin way back when. And I don't know if it's part of the reason Man's Ruin went bankrupt eventually, but Vice was the distributor for Man's Ruin. And during one of Vice's periods of flux, there was a warehouse full of Man's Ruin product that Vice was distributing that
Really?
disappeared. Yeah.
Did you get involved with Vice at the same time as you guys got signed to Matador, or
Yeah, it was just around, it was all around the same period. Like we kind of met Vice just before, met Sarouche, Artie Philly, wrote an article about fucked up and career suicide in the magazine. And Andy Capper ran into someone, Jace Kilvo, in London or in Liverpool or something,
Mhm.
and Andy was like, "What kind of bands are you listening to these days?" And he was like, "You should check out Fucked Up." And so all three of them kind of we met around the same period, so just kind of got involved through that. Our record on Vice is actually technically a bootleg.
Really?
Yeah, because Andy never cleared it with the rest of the label and just gave the money and got the logo slapped on the back, but it got
Well,
incorporated in the catalog eventually.
yeah. I mean, Amazing Baby wasn't signed to Vice, but we had some deal with them. I think they did all the marketing, but like they were also involved with the recording of the record. But I do remember going to those offices, it's like 2008, and being like, you did feel like, okay, like I'm part of what's fucking happening now. Like this is exciting. Like there's all so much going on, and everyone's like fucking cool, you know? They
Well, it was
like,
interesting when you talked about how there's like no, like you have a song in the Barbie movie, or you have this
right.
like to be famous, like to actually be like mainstream
Mhm.
famous. Vice at a time had that. Like the fact that I was in some random ass Vice video about cannabis, it was wild how many people recognized me from that, or when they would be like, "Do I know you from somewhere?" And I'd be like, "Well, this Vice thing." That was always the thing that people, that YouTube channel was, and there weren't. It's wild because the numbers weren't that huge given the amount of impact it seemed to have around that time.
But it's just, yeah, I mean, it was just everywhere though. It's like the fact that like there's stacks of Vice magazines in every record store,
Mm-hmm.
and like I don't think I would go over to somebody's house who didn't have like 4 or 5 Vice magazines on their coffee table. It was just like
But
it
then
was
it
a very
stopped for us, people like us having that kind of impact, like where it wasn't your friends reading. And that's when I think it started having the impact on the mainstream world
mm,
for a minute, where there was like a brief window, Maddie Matheson, Dave Samaro, I guess, being the biggest kind of like things that came out of it, where that YouTube channel was the zeitgeist for a certain segment of pop culture.
well, 100%. Like I mean, maybe it's a similar thing as like we were talking about with Nirvana, where like Vice at one point, in my opinion, got too big for their britches and sort of decided to become a mainstream news outlet and culture source, which also sort of inadvertently, in my eyes and a lot of other people's eyes, made it uncool, where I felt like, I don't know if I trust you guys anymore, like, to kind of like tell me what's cool and what's not, what's hot or what's not, or doers or don'ts. But like, yeah, but it was a brief period. I mean, it was, Vice's coolness was a longer period, but like, I do think that like that 2008, 2009, and by like 2011, I felt like things were kind of changing already,
I grew up with it though. Like for me in
Right.
Canada, like I remember playing the second show I ever played with You're in Trouble, so it would have been like 95, and picking up an issue of The Voice at the Green Room in Toronto, and it was still newsprint. It was still the large format they used to do. It had an interview with Propagandhi. It had like all these sections. It's weird. I never trusted it for music recommendations in the way I'd look to like a Mojo, but I did find I always reacted to what they wrote about, and there was always like.
So like the way I came across Vice was like my sort of kind of obsession with like graffiti based zines, like Life Sucks Die. I don't know if you remember that, like While You Were Sleeping, but more like Life Sucks Die, which was just like most of the pages were just collages of graffiti, flyers, and porn, and then like horrific sort of Faces of Death style things, and then they would have interviews with like fuck, like Newthgrush or something, or then like uh um Cool Keith, and then like, and I felt like maybe a friend was like, Vice is like this magazine, like Vice is a kind of a more honed version of Life Sucks Die, where they're talking about graffiti, skateboarding, and then like weird fucked up stories, and then like interesting music shit. And it was kind of like a gateway to that, where I felt like it fell into that sort of hedonistic early aughts sort of like weird, I'm honestly like anti-PC movement, in a way where like I think culture as a whole didn't really understand the sort of results of actual anti-PC movement, and how seriously it just seemed like this sort of like insular scene, like, let's not fucking take, we can make whatever jokes we want, which was appealing to me at the time. But yeah, like it definitely felt like it represented me and my interests.
It's
For
Yeah, like I'm fascinated by like this. There's two documentaries, and the work is about Vice, and I
I've
feel
heard, yeah.
I'm interested to see if either one gets it, because it's 100% the story of what happens to kids in punk rock,
Yeah.
where you hit a point and you have to grow up. So there's a decision of, how do I exist in this world? Do I exploit this culture that I'm a part of and try and make that my way, or do I disavow this culture completely and try and do something else, and try and make my way through that? Or how do I reconcile my beliefs? And then there are some people that, yeah, react to their time coming out of punk rock with a rejection of the values that they had before that, which I think is part of the natural cycle of growing up. But given how extreme the politics are in punk, it can cause a Gavin McGinnis as
Yeah.
much as it can cause something else, And it's, I'm fascinated by this, the story of Vice kind of going from these dudes that were hanging out in basement hardcore DIY basement shows in Ottawa to being one of the most powerful media companies in the world that still survives. Like people are like, "Oh, Vice is bankrupt. Is the end of the Vice?" No, Vice will never go away.
Yeah.
It's the most malleable company on earth.
Yeah. But I also think it, maybe for you and for me, it did something that I also think like the best show did, where it almost was kind of like, I'm at an age right now where I need an outlet to poke fun at this scene that I took so seriously, was involved in some ways are are a little angry at because of the sort of like the stringent rules. And I think the best show does that, where they kind of like the Worcester calls or even Tom's sort of opinions, where there's so much punk rock sort of like, if you know, you know, little nods and winks, but it also has maintained this steady, non-offensive, almost like seemingly on the outside vanilla exterior, with this sort of sardonic, hedonistic, not hedonistic, but like sardonic and kind of satirical uh true message that also like maintains its respect for the scene, where I feel like Vice gave me that same feeling, but then kind of almost became too extreme and became like lost the sort of feeling like this is our inside joke world, you know. This is,
But
you know what I'm saying?
but then it trend like Vice has got so many different stages. So does the Best Show. It's interesting. I before I was saying this, I preface this with Sharpling and Worcester are the greatest comedy duo of all time and have probably
100%.
the longest running successful creative relationship in that world that I can kind of think of. I don't know how many. I'm not an expert on comedy by any stretch of the imagination, but I do feel like those guys have been doing it for so long, consistently funny, and it's awesome. So,
Yeah, it's brilliant.
but at the same time, I think the Best Show has had to change as a show, and very much like Vice at a certain point had to change, where it was, fuck you, fuck that type thing, to, well, what are we going to be? And that's when it tried to start shifting more to becoming this news
Mm-hmm.
organization. I think the Best Show has changed from being the you're going to get gomped Spike era of the show to being a much more inclusive community. Uh, the community kind of formed around the Best Show, and I know there was always Friends of Tom, and I think there was a level of support given to the community in the early years, but I think almost that in a way the community formed around the podcast, without necessarily being connected to the podcast, certainly in different pockets as it was spreading around the world. And I think now it's much more fosters that community in a way, whereas
Yeah.
Vice kind of did the opposite with their community.
Well, they both had this sort of like, and I think as societies evolved, like both the Best Show and Vice kind of would punch down more in the past. You know what
Mm-hmm.
I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, people or society as a whole kind of realized that like that those are cheap laughs. You know, I would never accuse the Best Show of cheap laughs because it's brilliant and everything. Their sense of humor is so complicated. But like the Spike era, for example, like I feel like the sort of like, let's have these weirdos, you know, to kind of basically make a fool of themselves on our platform, and we'll all have a laugh, kind of dissipated in time as it became less of a okay thing to do, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's
But
definitely, and both came out of punk, and both came out of
yeah,
a culture within punk, zine culture,
yeah,
where there was that. And it seems different to say anti-PC now, because I think it means something completely different in the present day than it does back then.
yeah,
Because I think then it was a little more, I think we all, uh, looking at it, maybe thought it was a little more tongue in cheek, and hoped it was a little more tongue in cheek, or gave it the grace that it was a little more tongue in cheek, um, than it would be today. But this sort of like anti-PC backlash to 90s, early 90s, sort of like quote unquote PC
right,
culture, that was like forced exposure, Steve Albini kind of aggro, like,
right.
yeah, like fuck this shit. I'm like this dude. And Vice, I think, definitely embodied that. Answer Me, like the rise of Answer Me fanzine, the impact of that fucking zine and the subsequent books talking about January 6th is immense.
I don't know that.
Answer
Another
Me was a zine done by this guy Jim Goad, and it prided itself on the fact that there was like never any typos. And like you were saying, they like one page they'd be interviewing Al Sharpton, the next page they'd be interviewing David Duke. They did
right,
a top 10 serial killers list,
right.
or top
That's
100 serial killers list, and suicide list. And they eventually built to the fourth issue, which is like the Let's Hear It for Violence Against Women issue, or the
yeah.
rape issue, I think it is horribly called. And this got banned and pulled, and there was a huge civil rights case around this
Hmm.
magazine that I believe they won. And it was done by this guy Jim Goad and his partner Debbie Goad.
Hmm.
And
Where
it
was it
was
from?
Portland.
Portland. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm sure I could
There's beef with Poison Idea. Massive.
really.
Jerry and Pig both beefed with them pretty hard. And I think Jerry even maybe talked about it on the last time he was on the podcast.
Mhm.
It kind of came up a little bit. But Jim Goad, at a certain point, a lot of kids in hardcore became into Feral House reissued his book. AK Press reissued the book originally, I believe.
Really?
All the issues as a book. And it was so you could buy it from distros and you'd see it in obviously a little more quote unquote open minded, I guess, underground bookstores, because it was pretty offensive at the end of the day.
Right.
Certainly the fourth issue was not in the book, so you wouldn't see that thing around. That was not reprinted. It was just the first three. But the third issue had a cover with Hitler on it, so it wasn't exactly tasteful even early on.
Well, I remember that, I mean, like back to like sort of the Best Show versus Vice thing. I think that like the Vice's main sort of trope was punching down, where the Best Show kind of were able to sort of curb that and still remain extremely funny. I feel like Vice like lost their sense of humor when society changed to kind of criticize that approach. But like it's, I think that like fanzines like Life, not fanzines, but like magazines or whatever, zines like Life Sucks Die couldn't exist now, because that's sort of like shock. Yeah, there were I mean there were Holocaust images interspersed with graffiti pictures that were like, obviously from crust punk, that's all you see, but like it was a different interpretation. It was almost just like, we can print what, like, stop taking everything so seriously. It was very similar to wearing the fucking swastika armband in a way, and like in the early punk, like that sort of like, it's just a symbol. Like, who cares? Like, or just like, why do things so precious?
Well, I think the relationship between the fan base was different. Like I looked at the Best Show fan base was a lot more like a wrestling fan base, where you called knowing you might get gomped, and you called knowing that you might get abused every week, that you call forever. But there was this masochist, I want to be able to do this thing. And there's a safety that you're on the phone with this person. Like, they're being mean to you, but not to your face. And I think that was part of the appeal, that it was so aggressive. And I think a lot of the early angry Vice stuff was looking at people that weren't necessarily in on the joke. And,
Totally.
And that, I think, comes from Answer Me. And so this eventually, Gavin, having been this DIY punk kid playing in quote unquote anarcho bands, identifying, I believe, even as an anarchist back then, DIY bands and stuff, gets introduced to Jim Goad and Answer Me, and just opens up a world to him. And then Jim Goad eventually puts out a book called The Redneck Manifesto that is really kind of, there's a lot of issues with that book, obviously. But
when was this? Like what years?
Early 2000s. And this was another book that kind of very much One Life Crew made ripples in hardcore and punk when it came out, as people reacted to it, certainly a lot negatively, but it was also something that people would read, like, oh, well, I'm going to read this. I'm going to be controversial, and falling in line with kind of that anti-PC wave that we mentioned, that was kind of like happening at the same time within punk.
I have to go to the bathroom again.
Oh no, dude! I mean, I'm rambling, so if you want to go too, we can split.
I might, yeah, I actually might have to go,
I'll
but
cut all that out.
we could, but I mean, I think it's an interesting conversation. If you don't, I
Yeah.
don't want to, I don't want to cut it out by going to
No,
pee.
we finished. We can talk another time. We will talk another time.
So I'm trying to. Do you want to continue with Walter? Or you think we're good?
I think we're
don't
good. Like we have like I think an hour plus with them, right?
Yeah,
And then you and me will wrap up. I'll edit this down a little bit, and so it'll be like a close to 2 hour podcast by the time it's all said and done.
Sick. Awesome, man. So I'm trying to see if I'm in Portland on when you're there.
Yeah, we're playing there on the 7th, I think.
Okay,
And I'm going to set up a podcast with Jim, and then for the week the album drops, I'll kind of put them out like within that week together.
Right. That's awesome.
And announce the record. Obviously, drive to the record and drive to the site and whatnot.
Cool, man. That's great, dude. I appreciate that a lot.
No problem, buddy.
All right, man. Well, speak soon.
Love to the fam.
Yeah, same to you.
And,
all right.
See you in Portland.
Yes.
Bring
absolutely.
Isaac. Danger Aaron will probably be there.
100%.
And Yannick from Tragedy will be there too, and his hero's gone.
Really?
Yeah,
okay.
Yannick's the homie.
That's
all right.
awesome.
Love you, buddy.
Dude. Bye, dude.